And with that, I'll turn it over to today's host, Chairman Nick Langworthy. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you for everyone for taking time to join us on another Thursday at noon for our video town hall. It's been a very successful series, and we have many people watching live here, but then also as we export the video into Facebook and YouTube, we get many more viewers as the week goes on. It's a great way for us to communicate, during this pandemic, to tell you what's going on in the Republican Party as we bring leaders from the party to discuss issues that are facing families and taxpayers across New York State. And there's no more important issue in my eyes right now than discussing the reopening of our schools in the state of New York. We've all learned a lot over the course of this pandemic, but one thing that was clear is that virtual learning has severe challenges, and in many cases was a failure for our kids. Without in-school instruction, the majority of children suffered both academically and socially. Our kids missed out on opportunities that only our schools can provide for them, and they weren't able to continue their social growth and build friendships with their peers or improve on their listening and learning skills from in-class direction from their teachers. Unfortunately, it's left many children behind where they should be heading into the new school year. We have to remember that a well-rounded education is more than just academics, and that it is critical for our children's social development. Without an in-school instruction in the fall, our children are at risk of falling even further behind. And that's why it's imperative that New York State implements a responsible, safe, and flexible plan to make sure that our schools are open in September. It's also important that the governor isn't the lone voice in this discussion. We need to hear from local elected officials. Unilaterally making these critically important decisions is disastrous on the state. He should return the legislature to a co-equal branch of government right now to allow members to represent the people of the state of New York that they were elected to do. We have state legislators that's voices have not been heard because this legislature will not go into a true session where they are there representing the voices that they were sworn to uphold. Unlike Governor Cuomo, I welcome more input from our representatives and people from across the state. I value their knowledge, their backgrounds, and their areas of expertise. And on this week's town hall, we have what I feel is an excellent panel, joined by four very special guests to hear expert insights from what their background is on how we can safely get our kids back to school and in the classroom in September. First off, we have we have two returning guests for the first time since we've done now a dozen of these town hall meetings. But we have Assemblywoman Mary Beth Walsh. Mary Beth has represented the 112th district since 2016. It includes Saratoga, a portion of Schenectady County, and she currently serves as the ranking minority member on the Assembly Education Committee. Welcome back, Assemblywoman Mary Beth Walsh.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a pleasure to be back.
We have New York City Councilman Joe Borelli. Joe has been representing the constituents of the 51st Council District since 2015, which includes the South Shore, the proud South Shore of Staten Island. And Joe currently serves as a member of the New York City Council's Committee on Education. And let me just tell you, Joe Borelli is a spokesman for our party in New York City and across the state. He's someone that's loud and proud on many television programs, speaking the truth, and I consider him the speaker of common sense for the New York City Council. Welcome back, Councilman Joe Borelli.
Thank you, Chairman. I wish you would have the same conversation with Mrs. Borelli, who doesn't agree with your view of my own common sense. But thanks for having me, and I look forward to this chat today.
Very good. And please welcome Mike Martucci. Mike is our candidate for the New York State Senate's 42nd district that represents parts of the Hudson Valley and the Catskills. Mike started as a successful school transportation company that grew to over 550 employees with more than 350 school buses that provided critical services to thousands of school children each and every day. He's also served as president of the New York State School Bus Contractors Association, becoming a leading state and national voice on school transportation. We are going to be talking a lot about your background, Mike, and your expertise means an awful lot to this question of schools being reopened. Welcome, Mike Martucci.
Thanks for having me, Chairman.
And last but certainly not least, a friend of mine for over 20 years, Niagara County GOP chairman and county legislator, Rich Andres. Rich has been the Niagara County Republican chairman since 2018. He's been a county legislator since 2014. And he's also been welcomed here today because his day job is that he is a teacher of over 20 years and is serving in the North Tonawanda City School District. Thank you for joining us, Legislator Chairman Rich Andres.
Thank you, Nick. And besides being a teacher, I've got 3 young kids that did the home instruction thing over the course of the spring. So I feel I can add a little insight in that regard as well.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive right in. With all of you representing different parts of the state, I'd like to get everyone's initial thoughts on the importance of what reopening our schools safely and responsibly means to our state as of right now. So why don't we kick off with Assemblywoman Mary Beth Walsh.
Well, I think that we've had to learn a lot of lessons over the last few months, but I think this is something that we have to get right. We really have to get this right. I have 6 kids from 27 to almost 14, and the 14 and 16-year-olds both had to do the virtual learning over the last few months. And as you said, Chairman, it was not good at all. And both of them are, typically developing, kids that didn't require any real special intervention, but just getting them through it. It was very challenging. And my oldest son is on the autism spectrum, so I'm very familiar with kids who do have special needs. And I've been pushing hard for in-person instruction. I really pushed hard for in-person instruction over the summertime for kids with IEPs. And we got that approved by Governor Cuomo. Said yes if the school districts want to do it, but then we didn't get guidance from SCD really in time for many school districts to do it, to put it together. And I'm concerned.
Department?
Yeah.
Okay. Some of these acronyms might.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, everything's an acronym in education, unfortunately. But yeah, so one of the things that concerns me here, well, one of many things, is that we do have preliminary guidance that's come out from Department of Health, but we don't have guidance yet out of State Education Department as far as how this is going to happen. And yet we're asking all of the school districts throughout the state to come up with their plan by the end of this month. And last night, my own homeschool district did an online forum that was so jammed up with parents and teachers that I couldn't even get into it. I have to watch the replay of it basically. But, everyone is extremely concerned about how is this going to work? And I think not having the guidance from state ed right now is worrisome to me. I think we're working on very, very tight time frames. And I think, the reopening overall with the state has been very challenging because we're really asking businesses and other institutions to be extraordinarily nimble. And that's difficult. And I think if you're looking at something like a school district, and then telling them that they have to come up with a hybrid plan where some of it's going to be in-person instruction, some of it's going to remain virtual. You've got to work out the transportation piece that I know Mike will talk about, that, the educational piece that Rich is going to talk about. It's just, there's so many pieces that have got to come together. But my general impression is that there is no thing more important at this point that we need to get right as a state. And, the governor's always talking about us leading as looking at other states. He wants us to be doing the best job, and we need to do the best job for our kids, for our teachers, and for the families. So that's
we do.
Yeah,
we do. Joe, New York City has had is obviously if not the largest school district in America. It's number 2. I don't know the specifics there, but I know De Blasio put a proposal out there, like a three days a week, then 2 days a week, then maybe 1 day a week. I mean, it seems like it's more complicated and risky than just saying the schools are reopened. I mean, what's going on in as you see it in New York City schools? I know you've been very vocal.
Well, you're right, and I speak as a parent who went through the online learning process, and I wish we could be here today in July, actually giving a round of high fives to the chancellor and the teachers for actually pulling this system together the best they can for a period of time. We should be congratulating them. Instead, we're coming to the realization that the hybrid reopening plan is not going to serve everyone's needs. And as a parent, I can tell you the uncertainty that my wife and I, who both have to go back to work, have in finding childcare for our children is the number one concern we have as a parent right now. And look, we oftentimes get pilloried by the opposition as not being the party of science. The governor always talks about the stats. We've reached the point now where we see a consensus across worldwide institutions that reopening schools can be done safely. Yesterday, a panel from the National Academies of Science and Engineering urged that schools reopen, concluding that schools risk children falling behind academically. By the way, Nick, I'm going to bore everyone now with just a recitation of some of the studies that came out about this. On Monday, the Technical University of Dresden announced a study of 2,000 kids in schools in Saxony that were opened in May, and they found that schools did not become hotspots in reopening. In June, the Institut Pasteur in France, on 1,300 participants in a school district near Amiens, concluded that, quote, it appears that the children did not spread the infection to other students or teachers or other staff at schools. These are all peer-reviewed articles, by the way. In May, a study affiliated with the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control concluded children do not appear to be drivers of transmission, and we argue that reopening schools should be considered safe, accompanied by certain measures. In June, a study affiliated with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine found only a small number of clusters worldwide were linked to schools. In June, Massachusetts General Hospital, Harvard Medical School concluded, based on early data, schools do not appear to have played a major role in COVID-19 transmission. In May, a study from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, opening up schools and kindergartens is unlikely to impact COVID-19 mortality rates in older people. In April, the National Center of Immunization Research and Surveillance in New South Wales, Australia, found no evidence of children infecting teachers, and the spread of COVID-19 within New South Wales schools has been very limited. And then recently, the Journal of American Medicine, based on Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and China, they actually determined that the efficacy of school closure is debatable. However, the potential negative consequences of this measure cannot be ignored, and that it's possible schools closure may have negative effects and lead to greater medical, economic, and social problems. I am of this opinion that these people who studied this issue are probably right, and we're making too great of a risk in keeping schools closed for the foreseeable future, and that risk outweighs the risk of what's already been concluded to have been very small amounts of transmission between students and teachers and faculty. So lumping me in the pile of people who want to see schools open as quickly as possible with proper precautions.
That is very informative in those publications. I mean, peer-reviewed journals are laying this out. Those are inconvenient facts to a lot of the people that want to keep society closed down. I view that we cannot reopen as a country, as a state. We cannot have a truly functioning economy without our schools being open. Parents being, burdened with being educators in the home to, have their children there while they're trying to work at the same time from home will not work. The productivity level is not the same. But we have all managed the best we could. I mean, I just know as a parent of a little girl in kindergarten, my wife, took the, bull by the horns and did a great job. But she did that while trying to balance her job and her business. And it was a lot, and it was stressful, and it wasn't the same. In the socialization aspects for my little only child were really devastating. And, for 3 months of no, other children to interact with was really rough. And we're very pleased with the job that our school did, but it is not the same. And I don't believe that we can truly be back open without it. Now, Rich, you wear many hats as a local elected official, party leader, but your day job is a teacher, but also as a dad of a very large, vibrant family. So what say you?
Well, thank you, Nick, for having me. And this is everything I offer here is one man's opinion as sort of an educator and someone who has small children. But what we did in the spring there as an educator, speaking on that with that hat on, it was a total patch. I mean, it was ramped up to a system that only could possibly have functioned in 2020. 2015, I could have never pulled what we pulled together, in that short amount of time. So it was a kind of an amazing turnaround with technology the way it is, that we were able to do the job that we did in that short amount of time as educators. And I can't commend my fellow educators enough for sort of stepping up to the plate and going into unfamiliar territory in a lot of ways, and learning new tricks. That being said, there were a number of issues that I had personally with not only my children in school, but also my kids that I all came on at once, and the parents had no familiarity with it. So to get them kind of up to speed took a lot of just old-fashioned phone calls, and that's really what it took to get this up to speed. So the streamline, the process would be huge to kind of move forward. But as far as in the fall, I think it's not a matter of if we open schools, but how we open schools, because it can't be if, because there's just it was a total patch. We made it work. Most people passed. They turned in anything. The accountability wasn't there from the students. The ability to kind of turn things in was total, slapped together at the last second. So it becomes a matter of can we do things like that in the fall? I think starting a brand new school year, it would not work. A lot of these kids get lost in the shuffle. The biggest problem that I see, and I teach 2 or 3 classes a year with special needs students intermingled into the general population of the student groups. And what happens is these folks with the special needs, they fall behind really quick. They don't have the services. A lot of times they're with their special needs. Sometimes there's parents that have those same special needs, and they're not able to provide meaningful instruction to their kids. We have a lot of kids that receive meals and medical care right there at the school building itself. All that goes away. You have a lot of difficult home situations, custody battles. All those things are magnified by this pandemic. So by having them out of the schools, you lose that safety net, so to speak, for all those kids that have those special needs. And I think that's maybe being lost here as we talk about the health of teachers in their 50s and 60s and so on. We forget about the very critical role we play in providing vulnerable students with very important services that really are compromised the longer we stay away. So my concern is for those students to get us back in the normal functioning schools as soon as possible. But the debate still rages about disease transmission, and I like the councilman's point of view on the peer-reviewed journals. As far as if we can resolve that question, then let's put us back in the classroom. Unfortunately, what we're going to find is, as we go back, you're going to have a lot of people pretty worked up on the reading their Facebook feeds every day about the safety of their children and so forth. We got to speak with one voice and say very clearly what the science actually is, because there's just a very big divide I notice on the social media as far as what is real and what is not, and what is has been actually tested, besides what somebody's aunt says happened in their own home district. It's very clear with what
we have. We have, this is real, folks. You're not coming from.
This is my life.
We don't have, the luxury of living in sanitized environments at all times, but people are going to stores, people are going to shopping centers. If anyone's gone to Home Depot, you certainly see a lot of people in one place. We have controls when it comes to schools, and these environments can be sanitized and cared for in such a way, and protocols be put in place, to keep everybody safe. If we can get through horrible flu seasons. I mean, I believe with the best minds available, with the intuition of the people of the state of New York, we can get this done and keep people safe. I grew up in a rural area and graduated with a very small class of 65 at a place called Pine Valley Central School in the Southern Tier. And the question of transportation is one that I'm familiar with from the rural perspective, because my school district contained 4 townships, and some kids would be in the bus for an hour every morning on their way in to school if you lived on the far end of the school district. So Mike Martucci, as you look at this as someone that has kind of walked the walk when it comes to transportation and had to, provide services to school districts. I mean, what is your overall take as we start this discussion?
Well, certainly, I think the first piece is, here in New York, 2.3 million kids rely on the school bus to get to and from school every day. And I think that, the school bus, if done right, is something that's not at the top of our minds. We always used to joke in the business that if nobody notices the school bus, it means you're doing your job right, because it should come every day and pick up your kids and drop them off. And, a day of no news with school buses is good news. But unfortunately, I think as we look to the future, what we know is that there are going to be tremendous transportation struggles. I mean, certainly the largest one to call out is the directive about reducing capacities on school buses. You talk about your school district, which is a rural school district. There are so many of those where walking to school simply isn't an option for kids. So when you talk about reducing bus capacities, typical buses hold 66 kids, and reducing that number to 11 or 12 kids per bus, especially in really large geographic areas, it really becomes, the math of it becomes impossible.
Yeah, it strikes me that there's probably not enough school buses in the state of New York to meet the demand of spreading, the children out. I mean, would you say that would be the truth?
Yeah, Chairman. So there's no question about it. 26,000 school buses here in New York. If we were to reduce these capacity numbers, we would be talking about tripling the number of buses on the road. I mean, today is July the 16th. School starts effectively in a month and a half. There's absolutely no way and really no money available to bring in additional school buses, whether that means purchasing vehicles, leasing them on an emergency basis. This state faced a school bus driver shortage before this all began. And now when we talk about the challenges of the pandemic and what we face, there's no question that, from my perspective, and I think many parents and our panelists will agree, that transportation becomes really key, not only in these rural places, but also in our city centers around this state in terms of getting our schools open.
Absolutely. If you're interested in asking a question when we get to that portion, there's a raise your hand function that's available. So you could just use the raise your hand, or you can type a question into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen as we move forward in this. Mary Beth, as the ranking member of the Assembly Education Committee, I saw that members of the Assembly Republican Conference wrote a letter to Governor Cuomo in his administration calling for a statewide coordination in planning for the reopening in the fall. What were the recommendations that the Republicans put forward on, for detailed guidelines?
Well, we're not largely educators or physicians, so we relied upon other experts. And I think it was largely the recommendations came out of recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics, I think. And, as I'm looking at the guidelines that have come out of Department of Health, they're also, they don't footnote or cite to those rules, but I mean, they make a lot of sense. Things like social distance, things that we've been hearing about, right? And we've been living for months, but social distancing, face covers, space configurations, that's tough. Schedules, that's going to be very tough. Meals, small spaces and common areas, faculty and staff meetings, just it goes through just, there's so many different moving pieces to it, picking up on what Mike had said about the transportation piece, my local school district, one of the things that came out of last night's meeting that they had, their online meeting, was that they're encouraging as many parents as can transport their kids to school to do that, to again reduce congestion in buses. But then again, that's picking up on what Councilman Borelli had said, that you've got two parents who are working, that becomes difficult in terms of arranging transportation. So what we were really trying to impress upon the governor in part was, at the time, I can't remember what the date was that we sent this letter, but we're just saying, look, the clock is ticking, and this is, if you're trying to turn, a large ship, you can't, it doesn't turn quickly. We need time in order to do the planning and bring in the different stakeholders and get the recommendations out there and be able to put these things into place, and then educate the parents and families and teachers and staff that we're committed to doing this safely, and that we need to show a certain amount of flexibility. But there's a very tight time frame here. And as I said at the beginning, that's really what we wanted. Was the governor was saying over and over again in this press conferences, we're going to take a wait and see. We want to really look at the data. We want to really, and I get that. We all understood that, but we reached a point where we were saying, look, we need to know, because I'm having parents reaching out to me in my district office saying, should we be homeschooling? They want to know, what's it going to look like, so that they can make a determination as to, am I going to send my kids to public school? Am I going to homeschool and do that planning piece and submit those plans? Or, the families need to know, the teachers need to know as well, and staff and all the support staff. So that's what we were trying to really get the conversation going. I was really glad to see, and perhaps coincidentally, I'd love to have our conference take full credit for it, but it was either the day after or the day after that the governor came out and announced and laid out this time frame of, we're going to get the Department of Health guidance, then we're going to have the school districts present plans by the end of this month, and then by August 1st through 7th, he'll say whether it's going to be able to open or not. So I'm glad we at least have that.
Absolutely. And that is what's, you are in a deep minority in the state assembly as Republicans, yes, but driving the public dialogue and driving the public discussion is so important. I have noticed frequently, yes, that if we go and raise some hell on an issue, it seems like there's a response within a day or two, bringing, yes, things to the forefront. So, we're going to continue as Republicans rattling sabers on all of these issues to be on the side of the taxpayers in the state of New York. We need to have clear guidance, and you can't just wait till he decides that he's going to have a big unveiling at one of these briefings.
Right.
So many local elected officials tell me, we don't know anything about how to function going forward. He has so much power, and we have to sit and watch these briefings to find out what's what. There's no collaboration. Right. There's no working together. I mean, that's what seems to be so missing in this pandemic, is collaboration. And yeah, I've always believed that the best government is that closest to the people. Rich, you're a local elected official. Joe, you're a city councilman. You have, constituencies that you're responsible to. Someone doesn't get a critical service, they're going to call your office. They're going to, talk to you. Joe, as we look at the New York City plan, one, can you kind of outline what de Blasio's specific reopening plan looks like? And two, is it workable? Is it something that will actually function, or is it going to create more burden on the parents?
Well, don't forget that the mayor announced that they'd be going to a blended model with 2 or 3 days per week of in-classroom instruction. And then the governor came out just 3 days after that and said, well, pump the brakes, Bill de Blasio. That sort of, peeing match, to be polite, between the governor and mayor doesn't address any of the problems that parents have and planning that parents must do for the end of August and early September. The blended learning model, it's still going to require a working mom or a single dad or households where both parents work. It's still going to require them to go out and seek alternative childcare. I mean, one of the things that about 7 city council members and I, Democrats and Republicans, have suggested would be to allow the funding to follow the student. I mean, it's something like school choice, but it's not, because it would be for the duration of just this COVID pandemic. But if a parent is not getting his or her needs met, and the child is not getting his or her needs met, but there is a place for them to go, whether it's a parochial school or a charter school or even daycare, the funding for that student should follow the child to where they need to be. So, those are the kind of solutions that the mayor could implement very quickly and very easy. On the flip side, it doesn't seem like they're doing anything to prepare for the amount of teachers that we would also need. If you have a classroom of, say, 25 students, and now 10 of them or 15 of them are in the classroom, and another 10 of them are doing virtual learning, that cannot be done with one teacher. It has to be done with more than one. So there doesn't seem to be a plan for even implementing the brilliant plan they've come up with. And again, you're a parent like me. My oldest son's going into kindergarten, and I would feel comfortable sending him to a school full-time with precautions. My wife is a public school teacher. She feels comfortable returning to the school system with precautions, with safety measures, and I hope that can be achieved as soon as possible. And all we can do is pray at this point.
Absolutely. Rich, as a teacher, what have you heard, will be the changes when you go to school if you reopen? I mean, how will you have to administer your classroom?
Well, thank you, Nick. And what we've heard is that the governor holds all the cards. So they're just waiting with bated breath on what the governor is going to tell them as far as how many people, if it's a percentage or if it's Cuomo tells us. We'll just be waiting for more direction. That's pretty much it. They're coming up with, like you said, in New York City, they're coming up with plans that have a variation of this many kids versus that many kids, and what would it look like. But again, you're making everybody do multiple steps for something that's going to come down and be imposed on us. So it would seem to me, and this is not the first time the state has done this. The state is very, very, as part of it, almost like their practice. They'll give you a direction in which they want to go, tell you to prepare a plan, and then tell you, well, it really doesn't fit our plan, so you got to go back to the drawing board. This has been, in my experience in education, the most common practice of the state of New York is that they give you very loose guidelines, then they tell you to do it and come up with a plan, and then they change their, they say, well, no, it doesn't fit exactly what we wanted. Go back to the drawing board, instead of just making it clear from the get-go, which is what everybody's really begging for, is just make it very clear so that we can go forward with the exact plan. Because this idea of preparing for 4 different eventualities is almost absurd. The other thing that I find to be interesting is that if daycares can open, and these people that don't go to school are going to go to daycare, what are we doing here? That doesn't make any sense. Then you're really not protecting the kids. If that was your major intent, was to protect the kids, and they go back to daycare, I don't understand the difference. The part of my job where we're custodians of the kids for 7 hours a day. That's a very important thing to people. Learning is important, but just being in charge of the kids to make sure that they're safe. If daycares can do it, then why can't we? I don't understand where there's more structure in a school, you can keep track of the kids a little bit better. I just find it hard to believe that we can't be at least on par with daycare.
Well, it say we have one of our, more of a comment than a question, but a very poignant one. Travis from Orange County writes in, as a parent of 2, 8 and 5, where both my wife and I work full time, how can people care for their children during the days while they're working? If we now have to put our children into daycare, which is in Orange County, will cost him in excess of $2,000 a month. Is that any more safe than a school? When our children are in daycare situation with 20 other kids while still doing distance learning. My daughter's scheduled to start kindergarten. We need to ensure normalcy and safety for our kids. I hear this all the time, and I'm sure you all do too. Mike, as we kind of close out this round of questions, I mean, how would you design the system to be able to achieve the transportation in a safe fashion?
Well, so I think it's really a combination of a few things. I mean, first, there's guidance that tells us, as the councilman had outlined, that we can utilize school bus capacities higher than initially outlined. So certainly we want students to do things like wear masks on the buses. That process will be difficult to enforce for a bus driver who has lots of kids on a bus, but nonetheless is a precaution that makes sense. Certainly we have to commit ourselves from the transportation standpoint to regular cleaning and disinfecting. So get the tools necessary and the resource necessary to make that happen. I think a bit of it's a combination, like the Assemblywoman said, where we're going to be relying on parents who can drive their kids to help relieve the burden by doing that. And then lastly, look to schools to do things like flexible bell times. I mean, school buses largely operate for a couple hours in the morning and a couple hours in the afternoon every day. So if schools and teachers are able to afford some bell time flexibility, certainly one of the options is to use the existing structure of school buses and just make more trips. While there will be a cost associated with it, it's significantly cheaper than, said before, 25,000 buses to the road and increasing capacity by 30% or even more potentially. So I think it's going to be a combination of several of those things to help get us started in a smart way. But again, I think the reality is, again, given the short time frame that we have to employ several of these strategies so that we can have a realistic startup in September.
Well, that's the thing, that the time is so short. If we're going to have the ultimate decision be the first week in August, then you're going to have people ready 1 month out to open the school. I know, my child is going, for one-on-one tutoring at the school she attends, on a private basis, but they're already measuring things out. And now it's a Catholic school, so it's smaller in focus. But, and I'll put this probably back out to you, Rich. Do you believe that, you can space kids out 6 feet in the existing space of a school like you teach in?
6 feet. There is, my classroom is 24 feet wide. That would probably leave me with a classroom with 8 kids in it, I bet you. So, do we have to, have masks on? Perhaps should we worry about maybe plexiglass dividers like they have at the grocery store? I don't know, but I do know those things take time to kind of implement. We've got kids that in those classrooms, and it's I would teach in a very standard school. I know some schools have some different layouts, but a very standard public school building. There's just no way that you're going to fit 20 kids in that classroom. Now, is there creative ways of doing it in plexiglass or something like that? Sure, I suppose there is. And we just need to have some lead time to be able to operate effectively. Having 8 kids in a classroom is probably not a good use of teaching resources, and you're going to need a heck of a lot more of us. So I would think that they could probably do things a little bit differently.
Right. Mary Beth, from the Assembly's perspective, obviously all the things that we've talked about here, whether it's, we had somebody write in with a question about, whether there would be thermal scanners on your way into school buildings to take temperatures. I know there's some discussion of temperature check.
Right.
Whether it's extra PPE, plexiglass, dividers, as Rich mentions.
Costs money.
where's the money coming from?
I
The
know.
state is flat broke. We
I
have
know.
no resources. Uh,
No.
how,
And before even thinking about the reopening plan, we knew that the governor could cut, could, depending upon how sales revenues came in and how everything was looking, that, you know, school districts were concerned about upwards of a 20% cut. And I mean, there were some carve outs for different things that couldn't be touched, but there could have been a substantial cut. So my thought is, you know, I don't know. I'm not printing money in my basement. I don't think any of us are, but we can't, these schools cannot receive cuts and also be required to come up with the PPE and supplies and everything else that and do all this other stuff that they're supposed to do. That's just not going to work. So I don't know. I don't know how the finance is going to go. I will tell you this. We're going back to session on Monday for what we think is going to be 4 days of work. I did my education committee meeting. We've been doing them by Zoom. That's actually going pretty well. We're 54 bills, I think, on the calendar. 3 were majority bills and really didn't have much of anything to do with what we're discussing today as far as reopening. One had to do with making sure that schools could still get funding if their special ed students didn't meet the 180-day rule, things like that. There were 3 bills that had 2 were more, I might be wrong, but kind of like steady kind of bills. And the other 51 was a kill calendar, just killing all of the minorities bills for the year, so for session. So we know, as far as any great ideas coming out of the Assembly or Senate majorities, I haven't seen them as far as education. So we'll go back to work on Monday and see if there's anything that comes up. But I really believe that the majorities in both houses are waiting to see what the governor is going to tell us. What is the governor going to come up with? And to your earlier point, it is an abdication of our role as a co-equal branch of government. And that is long-term very concerning to me, very concerning.
It's extraordinarily dangerous to have, we don't have an elected dictator in New York State, but we have, for some reason, legislative leaders with no backbone, no willingness to stand up and, you know, with this is, and I'm calling directly out Andre Stewart Cousins and Carl Hastie, to be the co-equal branch of government that the people of the state of New York deserve. Now, Andrew Cuomo can't know every corner of New York State intimately from, you know, his ivory tower in the governor's mansion. Each assembly member and each senator has a core constituency.
Right.
And that's why we, you know, obviously the abdication, the handing over the full keys of the kingdom. I mean, it's one thing at the height of the pandemic, you got to have someone be able to make nimble public health decisions.
That's
But
right.
the long haul, the financial implications, we're going to be paying for this pandemic. Our great grandchildren are going to be paying for this pandemic. And, you know, that's why we need to elect leaders that will stand up and be heard, that will challenge the status quo, that will try to break down this totalitarian regime. That's why we need Mark Martucci in the state Senate, someone that actually brings real world expertise to the body, not just another lemming vote to just do whatever the hell Andrew Cuomo thinks is the right thing. I mean, the fact that this governor goes unchallenged within his own party is absurd. You know, Mike, what sort of perspective, you know, do you want to bring as this involves your Senate campaign?
Yeah, I mean, look, so I think you've called out a lot of the issues. I mean, what's so unfortunate is we have a legislative majority, both in the Assembly and the Senate, that had absolutely no foresight when it came to this issue. I mean, you know, we all sit here today talking about things that are 45 days away. You know, keep in mind that these are the majorities that passed the state budget in March, in the middle of a pandemic, that didn't contemplate any of these things. And it really is unbelievable that not only didn't we plan, but now, you know, these majorities aren't even being reactionary, as the Assemblywoman calls out. I mean, it's time that our voices are heard. You know, the governor is, you know, like you said, while there was importance in having someone being able to make nimble decisions, we're at a point today where these decisions are going to be long lasting. And as I think that we prepare for school start and so many other things in this state, you know, the Assemblywoman's ready to get back to work. We have so many legislators that are ready to get back to work. Let's do it. We have to do it now. And, you know, one of the things that you're never going to have to do is tell me to get to work, because, I still, for the life of me, can't figure out why our leaders are waiting to get down to the real business at hand.
Well, I mean, the work ethic you've showed as a candidate for the state senate, if you bring half of that to being a senator, your constituents are going to be extremely well served. I mean, Joe, you're an all politics is local guy as a city councilman. I can't imagine, no wonder you had to shave your head earlier this summer. You had to pull all your hair out dealing with the people that you've had to in City Hall. I mean, this has been an extraordinary year. Is there anyone in the council that has a common sense thought about where we go with the schools, or is everyone just rolling over for Bill de Blasio?
No, I mean, the interesting political dynamic is that there are about 10 members. Again, that's just, 20% of the membership. But there are 10 members who are Republicans and Democrats who believe that we should be making all efforts to open up schools in a responsible way. The differences between constituencies are not as great as we think, and I'm confident, though, that regardless of what neighborhood you happen to live in the city, those council members are hearing from their constituents that they are concerned that there is seemingly no plan that solves all of a parent's problems. And you know what? Maybe I shouldn't even say solves all of a parent's problems. There is no plan that actually makes it possible for a working parent to go to work and have their son or daughter attend school full time. I mean, we just got the bus plan from the chancellor. We heard about it in the newspaper, and the bus plan is simple. We're just not going to have school busing for children who don't have any specific special need that requires it. I mean, New York City, like many other places, urban school districts, has a matrix for how and when a student gets busing. If you're a certain age and you live a certain distance away from the school, you qualify for busing. So, I mean, these are parents who don't have cars. I mean, New York City is very dense. There is no option B for a parent of a 7-year-old if their son or daughter lives a mile from the school and there's no way to get there. I mean, there just isn't an option. Putting them in an Uber, putting them in a taxi is not something that the parent of a 7-year-old like my son, a 4-year-old like my son will ever be doing. So we are slowly coming together in a bipartisan way to start pushing back on this idea that schools shouldn't open. And I'm glad. I'm glad to have a lot of Democrats in the foxhole on this one with me.
Well, that's great. We're going to start to get a little input from some folks that would like to ask a question. First, we have Jeff Williams. We're going to bring him up on screen. Takes a moment. Jeff, welcome. Takes a second to bring people live. So, welcome, Jeff.
Unmute. Now you can hear me?
Yes.
I have my county chairman hanging out there in the bottom right corner. Hello, Chairman Anders.
Yep.
From the great county of Niagara. My question is and comment is we have a Democrat Party that continually talks about income inequality, and we're in but you have the constituencies of the Democratic Party who are calling to keep schools closed. So we're going to be in a situation where my kids go to school, who go to a private school. They're absolutely attending. They're going to be going, and quite frankly, I think it's going to work. But the kids who need it the most, okay, and the kid who designed the seal behind Chairman's behind Rich's head right there in North Tonawanda School District in the county of Niagara, aren't going to be in school. And if this happens, we're going to expand this income inequality that everyone continues to speak about. Because the only kids that are going to end up getting educated are the kids whose parents can afford to put them in a school that's going to be open. And it's I just don't understand the NEA, the United Federation of Teachers, all of these unions pushing for closures when, I mean, they're only hurting kids. I don't know how we combat it, how we battle it, and I guess my question is how do you battle that?
Very good question. Rich, we'll let you just jump in here.
Well, that's the hard part, and I think I mentioned in my opening comments is you're leaving kids behind, the special needs kids, the kids with the the difficult home situations, the kids with parents that aren't equipped, mentally or even emotionally to take care of the educational needs of kids. And Jeff, you got right to the point. The let's just call it what it is. The well-off parents are going to take care of their well-off kids, and they're going to put them further ahead of everybody else, and that is the real sort of sad part of this. And that's why we have to discuss how do we open schools, not if we open schools. It has to be start with the premise that we're opening and we're going to make it work. Just like when we did the online learning in the spring, we made it work. We did whatever we could. We're going to have to do it. We're whatever it takes to make this happen. We got to make it happen, because otherwise, not only we could talk about the economy, we could talk about the child care, but the actual real effects, the long-lasting effects, is these kids don't get to make up fifth grade again. They get one chance, and just pushing them through and sort of getting everybody through and saying that it's a pandemic, so we got to kind of look the other way when they don't turn stuff in. That's not going to work for a year-long process. It worked for 2 months and barely worked. But we need to make sure that this is the premise is that we are going back and we're going to make it happen some way, somehow. But this idea that I just can't live with it, that the kids are going to get that far behind, and you can't make it up. It's not going to be possible. The well-off kids will pull further ahead, and I would think, like Jeff said, that if this was a Democratic group instead of a Republican group, that'd be certainly time for some introspection there. But we need to make it happen.
That is true. Amen. Next, we're going to have Brian join us. Welcome,
Hello.
Brian. Hello.
I'm coming on. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. There you are.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Nick Langworthy, for your courage and vision. It is nice to see Chairman Rich Andres, as I so enjoyed being with him with President Trump in the White House, with the Polish-American leadership, with Polish President Duda.
Nice.
Regarding COVID in our schools, young people do not get COVID. If one in their 20s gets COVID, 99% are over it in a day or two. Socialization and education for children are extremely important, as young people must communicate, socialize, interact with other children in order to grow, develop, and get along with others in the future. With enormous technology, children have a lack of human interaction. These kids need schools open now. Teachers and professors can wear masks and gloves with COVID, but young people do not get sick from COVID. They must just stay away from the elderly, who are the most vulnerable. You can't treat kids like a water faucet, half at school, half at home. Too confusing. There's a big economic impact with keeping schools open, with jobs, transportation, teachers, and support staff. Because keeping schools locked down does not enable parents to work and feed and house their families. Open up our colleges, elementary, middle, and high schools now. North of New York City, there is very little of a COVID problem. Thank you to Chairman Nick Langworthy for your leadership. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Brian with his weekly mic drop. He has a perspective. I mean, listen, there's differences of opinion here. There's differences of anxiety. There are some of us, my family included, one day you're thinking one way, one day you're thinking another when it comes to the virus. We all have to have our guard up. I mean, we can't just say this is not an issue. We should bury our head in the sand, that nothing's, to worry about. But, teachers play such a huge role in our kids' lives. I see the bond between, my kid's kindergarten teacher and her. My daughter lights up when she sees her. And she's been such an important influence. I mean, teachers are in person, are so necessary. What concerns me long haul here is, I think everybody loses track of the fact that, once you do something for long enough, it's no longer temporary. It becomes just the way we do things. So if you're used to doing something for 6 months, well, that's your new standard operating procedure. I mean, there's plenty of things that we used to do that will never be the same. And, is it the way you grocery shop? Is it the way, we go to work? I mean, this Zoom technology we're using here to reach people across the state, something I had never used before COVID-19. And now we use it institutionally on a daily basis. But I think of the role that teacher has in that young life. And if it's just through a screen, it's not going to be that same relationship. And, the cautionary tale I think that, the teachers should remember here is that if we're doing distance learning, you might not need so many teachers. You could have larger classes. You could have, we're having lecture halls full of kids on a screen, just like, a big SUNY campus. And you get a much more homogenized education system. I think that's dangerous. I think that we need to have as many teachers influencing these young lives as possible for the future of our state. And what we can do to reintroduce those is so vital to our reopening. So that's my perspective on that matter. Anyone else have something they want to share?
Yeah, Chairman, I think we also lose sight of the fact of how a student's educational experience is going to be based largely on the tech savviness and ability of their parent to be part of the teaching process. Not all kids have parents who are equal in many different capacities, whether it's someone who can even log on the darn system to someone who might be working or not have time or whatever the case may be. So that's something that is just going to have to be dealt with and accepted, and it's an unfortunate reality of blended learning.
And just the connectivity issues. I mean, you get up to parts of my district, Councilman, you don't even have broadband. You don't have a good cell phone signal. So, I mean, you talk about equal access to a good education. That's a problem too. So, yeah.
There's as I've traveled to all 62 counties in New York, I can tell you there's a hell of a lot of places where I don't have a single bar on my phone. I can't imagine that your broadband is in great shape. I mean, I think of the 75 miles through Hamilton County that I drove.
Oh yeah.
One single bar. There's the North Country. I mean, even parts of Long Island, it's very challenging to get a good cell signal, and that is something that our kids have to contend with. I mean, there's plenty of people living in poverty that, internet access is not available to them. And not all, as Joe said, I mean, not all parents come to the table with the same education, their same ability to be educators. I mean, we're submitting our children to the education system to improve them and, to give every kid the chance to be great. If we're going to spend this much money on the system and then throw our hands up and say, sorry, we can't reopen it, it seems like a great failure for a state this great. So I think we have time for one more question, and then we're going to have to say goodbye for the week. We have Denise, I believe Denise from Westchester. We're bringing Denise up on the screen.
Hi. Hi.
Hi, Denise. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. My question is, and something you actually sort of answered, which is, where's the money going to come from? If we have to bring in another, I don't know, you have to double the number of teachers, provide the technology. I mean, I know in my own particular school district, we probably dropped about 3,000 Chromebooks. I know that's going to show up somewhere in our budget as how we're going to pay for that. There seems to be such resistance as to where the money is going to come from. In addition, I wanted to comment about the article that was in the Daily News this past week with regard to the hits the Democrats have taken by the progressives. And I think that may be somewhat leading their resistance to take a stand. Stuart Cousins is not my representative, but lives not for her district is right on the other side of my county. She's scared of those people. She won't say that out loud, but she's scared of them. They're not her. Amy Paulin is my assemblywoman. I know she's scared of them too. You know, and these are pretty progressive people in my mind already. And it's going to be a problem. I don't, but yet where's the money going to come from? Where's the money going to, because I know that New York State's going to come back with the same nonsense of, you have to do these 12 things, and where's the money going to come from?
Well, good point, Denise. Thank you very much, and thanks for all that you do for our party. But that is a really good perspective on where does the money come from. We've got another comment here from Michael. I would like to know what people think of pushing our needs from a financial standpoint. Many here in Putnam County want to start pushing for cutting school taxes if we're not going to get full-time school for our kids. We pay enormous taxes, and it's like paying full price for a car that has no engine. Unfortunately, we don't need all the facilities and teachers if they're not full-time, and the unions are fine for working half-time, but not for half-time pay. I wouldn't advocate to cut anybody's salary at this point, but we should just strive to get back to normal. So any closing thoughts on the financial burden that's in place, even though we're not fully utilizing our schools?
Nick, could I jump in? I had been in teaching long enough to see the state go through some major crises before I got laid off early on in 2002, 2003. And it was a very difficult time for the state, and there was some mismanagement there somewhere. But the one thing that the state did is they came up with a retirement incentive that pushed a lot of these high salary people out the door. And not to say that those are likely the people with the most vulnerabilities to coronavirus. I don't know if that's something our conference would consider, but it seemed like there'd be a lot of people receptive to the idea of kind of getting a younger batch of people in the classroom. That you lose experience, but maybe it puts out that fire and saves the state a good amount of money in addition, because teachers a lot of times have many steps to get the top salary. So it'd be 20 years before you got back up to the level that they're making now. So it works better in schools than it does in other professions, I know, in government. But retirement incentive maybe for the assemblywoman to kind of consider perhaps.
Definitely, something of interest. There's a lot of unanswered questions. We're gonna see as they go. We're gonna be here each and every week, bringing these issues to the forefront, so that you are informed as to where your Republican leaders stand on these issues. And we are going to take the fight to the Democrats in this state every single day, as we have from the beginning. So I thank all of our panels: Mike Martucci, candidate for state Senate; Rich Andres, Niagara County Republican chairman and lifelong educator; Assemblywoman Mary Beth Walsh; and New York City Councilman Joe Borelli. Thank you all for being with us and sharing your insight here. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for what you do for our party. If you like what you hear, this is a cross-section of our party from across the state. We're working very hard, even in shutdown. We can't have in-person fundraising. If you like what you hear here today, you want us to reach more people, please consider going online, nygop.org, making a contribution. We certainly could use your support, as always. We're going to be out there fighting for the taxpayers and have your back. So we'll see you next week, Thursday at noon, for another episode of this town hall, this video town hall. It should be great. Take care and be well.